I'm the owner of Fermenter, and this is the first time we've had people in the space. For this space, I just finished getting it done yesterday, sort of this morning. I wanted to take this opportunity to plug my business because that's what capitalists do, right? But what I want to do is make what we want to do is make a space where we can have ferments that we sell. This case is usually living right under here. So we have all of our vegan cheeses, our lactic acid ferments. We have kombucha over there. We do all sorts of fermented stuff, misos, tempeh, and we also have the restaurant next door that utilizes all those things that we make. What's that? Go sit down, yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, you know how to do it. Great. And and I have the restaurant next door that utilizes all those products in the meals that we make, and we have lunch and dinner next door. And then what we want to do with this space is we want to offer an opportunity for people to make their own ferments, because that's what I get excited about, is people DIY. So we could have some supplies and stuff like that. And then we're going to have some classes and workshops. We're trying to get Sarah to come and do a class. I'd love for these folks to come do a class sometime. They make wonderful miso here in town, and all that. So what we were going to do today was we're going to have a few of us talk before Sandor, so to make you guys angry. So we have Sarah from the Fermentista. She makes wonderful lactic acid bacteria ferments here in town that she sells at which farmers markets?
Right, a lot of them. The full winter schedule was on Instagram. If
you go on at the Fermentista on Instagram, follow her. She sells fabulous ferments, and you can get them at several markets that are super convenient, all the big markets. And then I'm going to do a little talk that will be probably confusing and weird. And then afterwards, we'll listen to the man, Sandor Katz, who has been, I would say it's fair to say, inspiration for both of us. And probably the reason why I'm doing fermented foods right now. Thanks, Sandor. Since I picked up my copy of Wild Fermentation at the People's Co-op many years ago. And anywho, I want you all to feel like you can participate in this. So feel free to interrupt. You don't need to raise your hand. Just ask questions. And I want it to be, have that kind of vibe. So feel free to just yell at us, throw things at us, whatever you got to do. And is there anything I'm missing? Anything I'm forgetting to say? Are you guys?
Did you give people basic orientation, where you have to go to the bathroom or something?
Oh, that's good. If you need to go to the bathroom, we don't have one in here, but there is one right in the restaurant, and we left the door open. You go in, you walk on back, and there's going to be somebody who's going to intercept you and say, "What do you want? Get out of here!" And they'll scream at you a lot, and then you say, "I need to go to the bathroom," and then they'll show you where it is. That's the usual arc of that. But really, there's a bathroom next door. We're totally open. And then, how many of you are having the dinner afterwards? Oh, so many of you. Great. It's not very good, but I hope you like it. Without further ado, let's get everyone settled in, and then we'll get started with Sarah here. Is everybody here, Liz?
Yes, everyone is here.
These two folks, you got chairs? You might get.
There's a chair back here. There's a chair up there. If you want to take them home, sir. And I didn't check you out.
Cool. And while we're waiting here, let me just say, hey, there's Callie right there. Let's say hi to Callie, everybody. Callie's one of the cooks here, and they're fucking awesome, and we love them. You guys mind if I swear? No? Great. And then Melissa back over there, in the corner over there. Melissa makes all the tempeh, all the koji stuff, a ton of other things, and she's super talented and amazing. And then we also have Liz Crane back there, who organizes the Fermentation Fest. I'm probably going to try to get her to come up and talk with me, and because she knows more than I do. And then we're writing a book together, which is kind of cool. So, right, let's get started now. You ready to go? Cool. Welcome.
Hi, welcome everybody. I'm going to take a quick survey. Would anyone prefer that I wear a mask, or would everyone prefer that you hear me more clearly? I am booster. Who would prefer a mask? All right, great. I will be wearing a mask. So we're gonna do a quick kohlrabi ferment. Who has made sauerkraut before? Wonderful, then you know everything I'm about to tell you. Who would like to make sauerkraut? You are about to learn everything you will also need to know to make sauerkraut. I'm just picking a new vegetable. Has everyone seen kohlrabi before?
Not that big.
Okay, it looks, I know, I only, okay, here's my thing. It's available a lot of times during the year. I will only buy it in the winter when it is called giant kohlrabi because it is easier to peel and I won't take a vegetable peeler to this, I take a knife. So this generally has weird little leaves coming off of it. It looks like a root vegetable. It's actually a weird little like space alien that sits on top of the ground. Yeah, I don't know. It's in the cabbage family. It's cool. It feels very Pacific Northwest to me. I love it. Great. So again, you can get it a lot of times during the year. And you can probably use a vegetable peeler. I think the skin is edible when it's more tender. We're going to cut it off.
Those are huge.
They are huge. They're giant. It's not that hard to process. You kind of hack at it. At some point you can see these little white things. As long as you cut all of those off, and you're welcome to just test it. You're welcome to try a bite, and if it feels chewy, then cut more off. But it's not a hard vegetable to process.
Looks refreshing.
It is. It gives me jicama vibes. I don't know if anyone.
Love jicama.
Yeah. Okay. So I got my little trash bucket here. You could probably send this through a food processor and that would work just fine. I kind of like little cubes on mine. I found the best way. Cut it in half. Do your little chunks. Make them easier to cut.
Why did you choose kohlrabi?
It feels very Pacific Northwest to me. It is December, and this vegetable is a beautiful vegetable in December. And there's not always a ton of other vegetables to have access to, and it's delicious. Or in Aaron's words, it's fucking delicious.
Yeah, buddy.
When it's fermented. So that's how I cut it. That's how I process it. Dun 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 dun. Magically turns into this much kohlrabi. Okay. Who's got their calculator out? Because this is 2,320 grams of kohlrabi. That is okay. Who's got a calculator? Somebody has a phone.
Siri.
I got you.
Thank you. 2320 times 2%, which is 0.02. So that is 2320 times 0.02. What's my number?
46.4.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Whoa, she's got it.
So I use a 2% salt ratio. That's how much salt I use on things. Do you have to use gloves? No. Are my hands really dry all winter? Yes. Does salt make it worse? Definitely. You don't have to use a 2% ratio. If you want to go by taste, that's great. That's fine. I try to do this professionally, so I have a recipe, and mine is actually 2.25% for no good reason, but 2 is an easier number.
I do 2.5% for some things too.
Yeah. I used to do that for pickles, but then
I read like an old like sauerkraut manual from a factory that said 2.5%, and I was like, let me give it a shot. And I was having texture deterioration issues, but it turns out it's probably the cabbage I was using.
I do a lot of cabbage. I don't use kraut cabbage. I do short ferments with like a nice, delicate, local cabbage. Buy local produce, pretty please. Go to your farmer's market, find the little co-op that does the thing. If all of your produce is coming from Mexico, who knows what they sprayed on it to make it survive the journey. And that'll mess up your ferment. And also, like, your local farmer is gonna save the world, not the transportation costs on that distant veggie. Anyways, this is already starting to get a little bit wet. I did measure the salt. I put mustard seed in my kohlrabi. I'm not measuring this.
Is there a certain, do you prefer a certain type of salt over other types of salt?
Great, excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. I use kosher salt. It is an easy box to find in the grocery store, and it is non-iodized, which means it will not mess with the microbes that you are trying to foster. You could also use pink Himalayan salt, sea salt, pickling salt, any of those. I get this because it is convenient and cheap, and it serves my purposes.
Can you use Mrs. Dash?
I don't know Mrs. Dash. Is that a joke?
Yeah, it's not that good.
Isn't it not salt?
I think it's like a salt substitute. Yeah, my mom loves it.
Okay, so this is salted, and it's maybe a little more mustard seed than I generally add, but I went a little, I just kind of shook it in there. Let's talk about fermenting vessels. This is what I am going to use today. This is a $6 jar with a $1 airlock on top, and the brew shop down the street. What is it? FH Steinbart.
Yeah.
Steinbart. Sounds German.
We sell them too, by the way.
Or right here, so drill a hole in the top for 35 cents. So this is less than $10 worth of equipment. That is all you need. If you don't.
When you said that the other day, I ordered grommets, and I have a million airlocks. I'm ready to go.
Love it. Yeah. This is my favorite at-home setup because it is very cheap. It is very accessible, and it's a good size. It's not too big. It's not too small. And the airlock. I prefer oxygen-controlled ferments. I think they're a little cleaner. You're less likely to get mold. You're less likely to get camies. They're less likely to oxidize. I kind of like the crunchier, fresher style that they facilitate, but that is a preference. That is not at all a necessity. If you don't get the airlock and you just want to use the jar, go for it. Just put a towel on top to keep flies and dust out. Other options that I really like are if you want to go the fancy, trendy, ceramic way, a little jar like this, it's got a well, you put the lid on it, and then you fill this with water, and that works exactly the same as this airlock. It's just when pressure builds up inside, when CO2 is produced, it just bubbles out. Because this lid doesn't weigh that much, so nothing's gonna happen. It just bubbles out, but then no oxygen can get back in because the water is creating a seal. It works exactly the same as this, it just looks fancier. Otherwise, something that's a little more accessible for most home kitchens. Oh, I just broke my rubber band, so you're gonna have to visualize this. Okay, so we've all seen these, right? You click them into place and they're locked. If you do a ferment in here, gas will be produced inside, like physics and chemistry, all that fun stuff. This seal is stronger than the glass, and you can break the glass. So either you have to burp it every day or two and open it and release pressure, or what you can do is instead of locking it with the mechanism, with the rubber gasket, you can just
That's genius.
Really smart.
You can wrap a rubber band around it, and it helps if you use a rubber band that didn't come out of your trash drawer in your kitchen from months and months
Sandor,
ago.
is that going in the revision?
But also, I did just tie it in a knot, and it seems fine. So now, as pressure builds up inside, it's not so strong that it won't just bubble out, but it's also strong enough to keep a seal that you won't have the oxygen coming in. So this is a lovely option for your at-home.
Where did you hear that?
I mean,
That's so smart. Can everybody give it up for
I
them?
don't know. I didn't come up with it. I definitely stole it from someone.
Yeah, but it's great.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So.
Do you sterilize your containers or?
I don't. Okay. At At home, I don't. In the commercial kitchen that I rent space out of and make my products professionally, I do.
Yes, Oregon Department of Agriculture.
I mean, not even that, but yes, I put them through an industrial dishwasher, yes. And it's fine. Like all of these veggies, if you're working at home, yeah, just, rinse stuff. It's fine. You want to facilitate those cultures to be growing and living and expanding, but I only buy produce from small local farmers who are not necessarily organic because they might be so small that it doesn't make sense for them to certify. But the practices that they use are good and great, and I trust them more than I trust me, and their soil is healthy and their vegetables are clean, and I always get enough culture coming in on the produce that I don't have to inoculate. And so if I sanitize things between batches, it's good practice for health and safety, even though it's not really a concern. But I trust the produce that I'm using, and it always has the cultures that take off and thrive. There have been times when maybe like beets have sat in the walk-in for 2 weeks, and I'd start something, and I'm like, well, that didn't really work well. And it's not the farmer's fault; it's my fault for letting it sit there. So you don't have to at home, but if you're using the right produce, then there's no reason that you shouldn't sanitize between batches because you'll get the correct cultures just inherently. Cool.
Oh,
What?
go ahead. Nothing.
Okay, so I'm going to stick this in here, and I'm going to hope that it's had enough time to sit on the salt to release enough liquid. I see some liquid in the bottom. Yeah. Kohlrabi's a good juicy one. There's a chance that I won't be able to get the brine up over the vegetables, and if that's the case, then I will try again after Aaron's demo. And if I still can't get the brine up over the top, then I will add some salt water, but I think that will be fine. So, let's pack this thing.
Pack it. Everything checks out so far?
Yeah, dip right here.
I love listening to other people talk, and I bite my tongue because I have slightly different ideas about some things, but that's all good.
Yeah.
Well,
There's no one way to do any of this.
Yeah.
Well, with that understanding, what would you have done differently for the
Well, no.
education
The
of
only thing
others?
is, I would just totally make fun of sanitizing things at home. I feel like the sanitizing things at home is a fantasy that we've been sold by people who want to sell us chemicals. And there's a million chemicals you could buy that would momentarily sanitize your jar at home, and then you're gonna rinse it with your non-sterile water and hold it with your non-sterile hands and put it in your non-sterile drying rack, and your non-sterile air is gonna
We're all gonna die!
So, the fact is that the preponderance of lactic acid bacteria on all plants growing out of soil on planet Earth means that when you get the veggies submerged, that's what's going to dominate. And it doesn't, you want to work with clean tools and clean hands, but you don't need chemicals to kill everything.
Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
And the one exception to that might be something like brewing contemporary beer, where you're starting with you're starting with a cooked and therefore more or less sterile substrate and trying to get a single pure culture to grow in. But when you're trying to get something that is abundantly present on the food you're fermenting to grow, you don't need a totally sterile environment, and you're not going to have one unless you have a laboratory to work in.
My understanding is that the lactic acid bacteria are going to have a head start above the other bacteria, and they're very quickly going to acidify the solution into a way that the bacteria that can make you sick can't even grow. So you don't need to sterilize things. Yeah, sometimes it's nice to wash your crop, that's sure. Yeah, I agree. So I'm going to keep pushing on this. I don't think that right now I'm going to get the brininess to here. I don't think I'm going to get it up over here in the next 2 minutes. So So we're gonna let this sit on the salt because salt and thyme will release liquid from vegetables, which is very nice to know. So we're gonna let Aaron speak, and then I'm gonna try one more time to
No, you're done.
push this down. So we'll come back to this in another 15-20 minutes and see what has changed and see if I.
What are you going to use to hold everything down?
Oh yeah, well we'll get there, but I prepped it. So it's not great to use plastic, but as a weight, I love a plastic bag. Do you trust your bag? I do. If you don't trust your bag,
Brought to you by Glad.
I got this at Cash and Carry down the street. So this is just water, but if I did not trust my bag, I found out if you send the bags through the dishwasher, they are not trustworthy. Put salt water in here, put a salt brine with the correct ratio so that when the bag, if the bag leaks, it won't disrupt the salt ratio of your ferment.
You know what I really loved was when I was at Cultured Pickle Shop like a couple months ago. They use river stones in bags. I thought it was really a nice aesthetic. Too.
That is very nice.
There's bins of river stones everywhere.
Okay, so I need a little more time to see if this releases more.
What if it didn't ever get enough brine on it?
Well, then we'll just add a saltwater brine. We'll make a 2% salt brine and pour it in until it covers it. I generally get these to work, but I also
It definitely will, because look, in 5 minutes you got half the brine you need, and in the
Right.
next,
So we're coming back to this.
What's the rhyme that everyone likes to say?
I don't know.
It's below the brine. It's gonna be fine.
Okay, so we're going to come back to this and see what we need to do. And I think Aaron is going to talk about kombucha and vinegar.
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 Yeah. So let's give it up for Sarah right now. I'm not going to say give it up for me when I get done talking, so I appreciate you guys would just automatically clap, all right?
You want to sign some of the audience to do that?
Liz, can you take care of that? Thanks.
Yeah.
Are we still live?
We're still live.
Okay. So, as I said earlier, I just finished building out the space, so I feel completely unprepared to speak in front of a large group of people, but I'm going to do my best. Sandor, can you just hold my hand for a minute, please? Okay, that gave me strength. Appreciate that. So we make a lot of stuff here, and the thing that I feel most passionate about making personally, I love eating all sorts of different things. When it comes to fermentation, I love probably most passionate about fermented products is chocolate, because I love fucking eating chocolate so much, and I love beer, and I love cider, and all that sorts of stuff. But when it comes to what I love making, I'd say kombucha and vinegar are two of my favorite things to make. I don't know what it is, but some things just strike you, right? So the reason why I wanted to talk about them together is because there's a lot of similarities but differences. And let's talk about that. Let's look at some vinegar and let's look at some vinegar in the making, shall we? Boom. So this is persimmons that are from my neighbor's tree.
Wow.
I'm all about local too, and luckily my neighbor has a big fucking persimmon tree, and I trade her chicken eggs for him. So we have, this is about a week before this one. So whether you're making vinegar or you're making kombucha, one of the goals is making acetic acid. And acetic acid is brought to you by acetic acid bacteria, which works on ethanol or alcohol, right? So to get alcohol, you need yeast to convert alcohols, or convert sugars into alcohol. Is that right so far? Great. And then, the difference between, a big difference between vinegar and kombucha is, this is two-stage, and the other one is like symbiotic, right? It's like happening together at the same time, right? Is that fair to say? So when I make vinegar, as opposed to this kombucha over here, which you can't see because it's in stainless steel, but I'm going to let you taste it. This is a kombucha that I'm letting go to what we're going to call kombucha vinegar. And the difference is, this is going to continuously convert sugars with those yeasts into alcohol, which are going to be converted to acetic acid, fruit acetic acid bacteria. So there's that SCOBY, that symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, that is going to be making those products, and it's working in open air, as opposed to, I mean, you can do this in open air too, right? But like, I do the airlock, and I add usually like a Saison yeast or something like that. Where do I have another one over here? Oh, this is a small jar. I have a big giant thing like this in the back, but I didn't want to carry it up because I'm lazy. This is a little Perry vinegar. So these are pears from my other neighbor's backyard that I made into a pear cider and then made into a vinegar, which turned out quite lovely. So that's a finished product, and this actually happened really fast because I feel like the pears came off the tree already like alcoholic, right? So that I already like had booze like making. So I love making fruit booze so much, and I like to drink a good portion of it before I turn it into vinegar. So and this one you don't get quite as much alcohol from. So what's going on is you're going to make your alcohol in this first stage by, like I said, converting, and you're going to try to get it to be about 5 to 6%. What bricks would you say you start off? Would you?
Bricks are not in my vocabulary.
Yeah. So here's the thing I'm going to say about myself too. I like to say that I come from a craft perspective, which is a nice way of saying that I have no science background. I have no idea what I'm fucking talking about, but I end up making some things that taste pretty okay anyway. Which I also like to tell you because I want you to not be intimidated. Where's Jordan at? There's Jordan over there. He's a food scientist, so he knows. What's the answer? You know?
Can you repeat the question?
What is what do you want? What bricks do you want to start at? You think, like 13?
To make kombucha?
To make alcohol for vinegar. To make 5 or 6%.
To make around 13 to get to like 6% alcohol.
Yeah, which is a good range to be in.
13.
So you can get a refractometer. Everyone needs a refractometer, right? I think in your kit. Okay. Anyway, but the key similarity between vinegar and kombucha again is that the production of acetic acid bacteria. The difference is on how they do it. So this is going to make my alcohols first, and then I'll make my acetic acid, and this one will go continuously. And so this one's going to need, with the vinegar, you're going to need to kind of stop the action. So a lot of times people will like bring it up to like 158 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll cook it a little bit to kind of stop. But with my persimmon vinegars, I've never done that. I've just let them keep on going. They've formed like a really robust mother on top. Let's see if we can see. Yeah, there's a mother on top of this guy. We'll pull out and take a look at. Oh, and here, by the way, is just so you get an idea what the mothers look like. This is a kombucha mom. And this is not super robust vinegar mom, but it came off that Perry vinegar pretty quickly. I started this like 2 months ago, and it has this nice little, right? So,
Is that going to be our first course for dinner
Yes.
tonight?
And then we got this mom here from this guy. Oh, and I'll show you another one too while I'm at it. You guys like moms?
I don't know what it is. We have some of the mom.
I love, there's Food Fight Grocery. Does everybody know Food Fight Grocery? They came up with a t-shirt a few years ago, I wish they still made, that had a kombucha, like a thing on it that said MILF. I thought it was pretty good.
So someone here didn't want to know what is a mother. So basically this layer that floats on the top, the SCOBY, the symbiotic community of bacteria and yeast, it's a solid layer that on kombucha looks like a little rubbery pancake, and it's
This guy here.
Whoa, that's huge.
yeah. So it's like a cellulose layer that functions as the home to the community of organisms that's performing the fermentation, and then the organisms grow into the nutritive liquid, but then it also grows, so this gets thicker and thicker over time, and with each new generation of a sugary substrate that you add into
What
it.
prevents like a mold or a slime from forming and turning it?
What's saying?
What prevents a mold or a slime or some other bacteria from coming in and turning
Well,
it?
I mean, you can sometimes get molds developing on it, but generally you want to use a small proportion of mature kombucha in with your new sweet tea, and the acidity functions to inhibit molds from developing.
And no matter what ferment you're making, you're tending, right? So like we have to be here 7 days a week to tend to all of our ferments. We can't like take a day off. So luckily we have me and I have Melissa back there who can come in when I don't want to work. And like so we come around with the kombuchas and we push them into the tea and make sure they're moistened on top, that it'll dry out, that there's not something sitting on top of the raft that's gonna like allow that kind of growth to happen. But Sandor's absolutely right. Like basically, whether it's this one or that one, I'm going to try to get the pH down, and that's where acidified foods are safe, because acidified foods that are like below what? Jordan, what's acidified? 4.2.
Yeah, anything below 4.6 is like.
Anything below 4.6.
Yeah.
On a pH scale, anything below 4.6. So we have like this handy dandy pH meter over there that we use to test all of our stuff to make sure that it's that Oregon Department of Agriculture is happy. But we can taste it. I mean, it tastes acidified. But this big mama here is coming from our botanical kombucha, which we have this 40-gallon tank over here going, and we make and so like Sandor said, when we make when we make kombucha, what we do is we brew tea to make it traditional kombucha. You don't necessarily need tea; you just need carbohydrates, right? So we start off with sugar and water and tea. To make something around 13 bricks, and then we backslop a good amount of older kombucha in there. And so what we have in the back there is that we have several tanks of kombucha that are young, and then we have older ones that we use as starters, and then we have really old ones that we use as acidifiers, which we use to kind of like stop the action of the kombucha going. So that when we bottle, that we don't have like continued growth and like alcohol growth and stuff like that. I want you guys to taste one, because what happens with kombucha is that if you keep on fermenting it, it'll keep on fermenting all the sugars out. You can make kind of a sweet vinegar, right? Like you can make a vinegar and like stop its action by adding getting the pH to a certain level or something like that, and just and stop it. You can make like a balsamic, whatever, will have a residual sweetness to it. But like kombucha will just keep on getting drier and drier and consuming all the sugars and becoming more and more acidic. And so what we really love to use for seasoning food is we do kombucha vinegar. This one is in between, and I wanted to taste this out with you guys, because not only is it really an interesting and different kombucha, and you can see it's on its way to being the vinegar, but also it's also showing you that you can do something without using tea. So in this case, we try to use a lot of waste products. We took the leaves from celery root and washed them really well, chopped them up, and then poured hot water on top of it, some sugar, and then, can you smell this?
It's so good. That's so yummy.
Yeah, it's killer.
Yeah, that sounds like an amazing flavor.
Yeah, and then it turned out really dang good. So what I'll do, can I get some assistance? Melissa, do you think you can help me out? Callie, do you think you can help me out? Cool. Do you mind if I just do a little pass around real quick? So I'll pass around some portions of vinegar. Liz, can you help us out too?
Yeah, definitely.
Let's get this done.
Yep.
Just good. Sure.
Thank you.
We'll load up a tray and you can go walk around. That's the idea. Sandor, how do you like the Pacific Northwest so far?
Celery.
Oh my god, I'm having a great time.
Are you? Where have you been so far?
Vancouver, Eugene, and I spent the last 24 hours at Brighton Bush Hot Springs.
Woo! Lord Almighty.
What's left of it?
It's steamy over there.
But I had to look for it. It wasn't like abundantly obvious everywhere.
Who's tasted it? Who likes it?
That's incredible. Yeah.
Isn't it nuts? Oh, Sandor, let me do it.
Let me get this.
I never know what to do with celery with leaves.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, celery is such an, one of the best krauts I ever had was, it was grated celery root with celery stalks cut up,
Yeah.
celery leaves, and celery seeds, all mixed together and salted, and so delicious.
How many more do we need, y'all? Raise your hands.
Okay.
Okay, we're getting there.
So when you do make kombucha from tea, does the kombucha making process affect the caffeine content at all?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so, does it? No.
Yeah, I mean, not in any significant way. You know, I mean, people who are very sensitive to caffeine will always feel the caffeine in kombucha. But I mean, you can also make kombucha from like decaf teas.
Yeah.
You can use exceedingly small amounts of tea. I mean, sometimes people make it without any tea at all. You know, people have varying degrees of success with no tea at all. Like my observation is that not all kombucha mothers are necessarily absolutely identical, and some of them might turn out to be more adaptable to other kinds of substrates besides tea.
Just to speak up, my mother is not always right, but what she does is when she's making a black tea kombucha and she wants it to be less caffeinated, she will pour boiling water over the tea and do a first rinse, and then steep the tea a second time with a fresh batch of hot water, and
Like Chinese style.
she might be right, she might be wrong, but it's something to Google.
Do we have, how many more do we need? Everybody have one? Oh dang, I poured too many. Yeah, and then,
Thank you.
let's put it back in the old pot.
Celery flavor is really nice in there. You can taste the hint of it.
Thank you.
Yes, Fox.
It looks like a couple people had questions.
So do you try to use like one SCOBY type per type of creation? that you're
One
making?
what, I'm sorry?
It's like a one SCOBY per type of creation, like if you're doing black tea.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
want to use black tea.
I do, and I think like Country Pickle Shop is a great example of that, where they have like 70 different jars going on, right? It's like, here's their parsley SCOBY, and here's their, they do parsley, turmeric, and they do sencha. So we use sencha tea for our basis, and then we have a botanical tea that we call botanical tea, that we make a different herb and flower mix. And those are our two major ones. And then I'm looking to do like maybe a parsley one too, because our friends at Country Pickle Shop inspired me with that one. But you can take those bases and then change it. So for example, they make a turmeric kombucha, and so it's fresh turmeric, grated hot water, sugar, add a kombucha mother. They originally probably started with a tea one or whatever, wherever they could get, and then they've just gone for so many iterations that now they have like a turmeric robust colony going on. And then they'll take that and they'll put it into a container, add beet juice and ginger, and then they'll bottle that, and then they have a beet ginger turmeric.
So that's usually the secondary
then-
fermentation,
right.
which doesn't involve the mother. It's like you've already had the primary fermentation on the mother, and then you add some other flavoring with some more sweetness for the in the bottle finishing that creates the carbonation.
Yeah, if you're making a kombucha really simply, right? I took a tea bag and some sugar, and I put it into this. A guy earlier made a tea concentrate. This has been going for like an hour, right? And now it's at room temperature, and I can go over here and I can add some filtered water. I always try to use filtered water for pretty much everything. We put a big filter on our water system so that we can make sure that we're not getting chlorine in there that can like kill microbes, right? And then I'll take some of the mother, which is the liquid for me is the most important part, and I'll throw that in there, and I'll throw some of the moms in there, and then I'll put a napkin or a towel on top of it and a rubber band, and then
Because it needs to breathe, it needs oxygen to grow.
and then I'll tend to it by I like to stir it every day and to make sure that the mom's going to float on top and then start to take the form of the top of the container. And then you'll have eventually a kombucha a flavor that you like. You stop it at the sweetness and acidity that you love. And then you start a new batch of tea, cool it down to the same thing, pull out some of this, and add it to the next one and keep on going and going forever. So you don't need to buy kombucha anymore. God bless you. Yes.
Over here there was
I was curious to know how, at the end of the ferment, when you're going to bottles, how do you determine how much sugar to add?
Well, we do it a little differently. I mean, admittedly, we do forced carbonation. So because we're doing so many bottles, like we get a little bit terrified of trying to figure out how to get it to be to get perfect on secondary fermentation. So we finish it completely in the container and bring it to where we want and tune the flavor. Then I put it in a bright tank and I carbonate it, and then I bottle it in a with a purge system. But I think a lot of it has to do with just playing around, and then you can always control the amount of CO2 that's being built up by just burping your bottles and monitoring them. I think the thing that the biggest takeaway that I have from fermentation is tend to your ferments and just take care of them. So you have to watch them.
But it is potentially hazardous. I mean, I hear all the time from people who have bottles exploding, and so I mean, what I do in that situation is I'll always bottle at least one reference bottle in a plastic bottle. I just collect a quart or 2-quart soda bottles at the recycling center, and even if you want to do the rest in beautiful glass bottles, do one bottle in plastic, because you can just gauge how pressurized it's becoming. And once that one's pressurized, you can assume that if you have some in glass, they're similarly pressurized, and then get it in your refrigerator. But they really need, you need to keep an eye on them, because they definitely can explode, especially if there's a lot of sugar in them.
Heck yeah. So at the end of the day, I guess what I was ramblingly trying to tell you is that I really love vinegar, and I really love kombucha. I love acidity in food. I love the brightness that it brings. I love cooking with kombucha and bringing it into our dishes. You'll be able to have whoever's eating the dinner tonight, we took the botanical kombucha and reduced it down to a kombucha honey, which is going to be drizzled on the dessert, which I think you'll really like. But so there's a lot of similarities and differences. But at the end of the day, everything's fun and easy to do, and I'm really excited about getting you all into the shop and sometime and being able to just wrap and hang out. So without further ado, did you want to check on your ferment one more time?
Yeah, can we just see if we can do it real fast?
Yeah. Oh.
And in fact, you can wait another.
Oh, you know what? We might not be.
Before that, let's hear it for Aaron.
Yeah, let's hear it for time.
It's not 100% there, but it is close enough that I think if we just put a lid on it and we look at it tomorrow, it's going to be just fine. So yeah, that's it. Now we're done. And again, we should check on this tomorrow, but I think that it enough builds up in that 20 minutes, that 24 hours is going to be just fine.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, working with fresh vegetables, you rarely would have to add water. There's always enough juice. If you're working with, veggies that have sat in a refrigerated warehouse for a few months, that's a whole different story. But fresh vegetables are juicy, and if you're in a hurry, you might need to add water. But if you're not in a hurry, and if you wait an hour, 2 hours, they'll get nice and juicy.
And this kohlrabi is beautiful, and it came from my favorite farmers, Brian and Mary at Wild Roots. They're out the 84, take the Lewis and Clark exit, and they do beautiful, beautiful work, and they're very socially conscious, and they take care of their land and soil, and their people.
They're people, ladies and gentlemen.
So anyway, just buy local veggies from your small farmers. Just please go to farmers markets. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for my kids out.
Well, thank you for coming. The door's that way. No, I was kidding. Before Sandor talks, I wanted to also give him this. This is a kind of a cool thing. I talked to my friend over at Steelport, who they make, it's kind of cool, they make a knife here in Portland, Oregon. Okay. And so it's a hand-forged knife made with an ironwood handle. Whoa. It's a beautiful knife, and I talked to Eitan, he was the best man at my wedding, he's a good friend of mine. He said, I said, let's give Sandor a knife. So let me show you this thing. So this is for you, partner.
Don't hurt yourself.
There you go.
All right, wow, cool.
And it has this really cool magnetic side. Yeah, hand forged, made here in Portland, Oregon.
Very nice.
So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
All right. Very
Yeah.
All right. Well, what a pleasure to get to listen to both of you. The thing about fermentation is that there is never one singular way of doing it. There's never one singular way of explaining it. And, it's just always a pleasure for me to hear, of other people doing it. And so anyway, I am out here promoting my new book, Sandor Katz's Fermentation Journeys. And basically, as an outgrowth of my earlier books, which are The Art of Fermentation and Wild Fermentation, and actually I have two other books. One of them is Fermentation as Metaphor that's up there, and I also have a book called The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved, Inside America's Underground Food Movements. But, my books that are primarily about fermentation were originally Wild Fermentation, and then The Art of Fermentation, and then this one's just come out. But this one really is an outgrowth of all of the traveling that I have had an opportunity to do, because there's just so much interest in fermentation. And at this point, I've traveled to like 25 countries teaching about fermentation, most of the states of the US, most of the provinces of Canada. So, I've just like had the opportunity to travel a huge amount. And of course, when I go places to teach about fermentation, I'm not just teaching about fermentation. Like, I have to eat. Like, eating is a very central activity in my life. And so, I get to try things in different places. Often my hosts are, people who are, as excited about fermentation as I am. And, a lot of times they've been like, oh, we have to spend a day and I have to take you to, meet this incredible producer that I met, or, visit this indigenous community where they're doing a really unique thing. So, I've just had the opportunity to learn about a lot of different kinds of fermentation traditions. And, the reality is that fermentation is not a, unified set of practices. That, okay, there's lacto fermentation, there's alcohol fermentation, there's vinegar fermentation. It's not like everywhere in the world has all of these categories of fermentation, has conceptualized them in this way. So anything we could possibly eat can be fermented. Like, there is nothing we could possibly eat that cannot be fermented. And, people ferment in all kinds of different ways. So fermentation we now understand as the transformative action of microorganisms. The way that food is transformed by, bacteria, and or various kinds of bacteria and or various kinds of fungi. And, it's not even that everyone everywhere in the world who's been practicing fermentation necessarily conceptualized it as fermentation. It's really only in the last, 100 and some years that we've had this, like, scientific definition of fermentation. And, I think sometimes it's only like when a microbiologist goes and takes a sample of something and starts testing it that, people necessarily understood that what they were, eating is fermented. So there's all of these kind of, disparate practices. And, and people do it all kinds of different ways. And like a lot of what I've documented in this book are, very, very traditional methods in different places. I was especially interested to see your persimmon vinegar. Yeah. Because, I have a recipe for persimmon vinegar in here that's like a Japanese style of persimmon vinegar where you don't add any water or sugar or anything. It's just like...
That's what that is.
Okay, that's what that is.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's just so beautiful watching them slowly decompose. So, you see how much less form there is to these persimmons. You see how much more liquid there is there. It's just because they're decomposing. But also, some of what I've written about is, what I would consider to be very kind of innovative experimental methods. So what I want to share with you all today is an innovative method for fermenting vegetables that I learned about from this fellow in Tasmania. So Tasmania is this island off of Australia, and when I was there, I've been there twice. In 2014, I taught a workshop, and one of the students who I really remembered because he talked to me a lot and he had a lot of questions, and then, he emailed me after the workshop. But his name is Adam James, and he was very interested in some of the Japanese sukemono. And, Japanese pickling traditions are really extraordinary in their diversity of pickling media. So, the pickles I grew up with, the Eastern European style pickles, I mean, it's basically cucumbers in a saltwater solution with garlic and dill and grape leaves and chili peppers and some black pepper, but it's fundamentally in water. That's one of the more kind of obvious ways of fermenting vegetables is vegetables in a brine. But in Japanese cuisine, they have nuka pickles, which are in a medium of rice bran, and then you have to moisten the rice bran either with some water or some sake or some beer, and then you'll add some ginger, you'll add some kombu seaweed, you'll add different seasonings, and then by putting vegetables in and then taking them out and then putting fresh vegetables in, you sort of build up the fermentation activity. And the first week, the vegetables just don't taste like much of anything when you pull them out. But after 10 days, 2 weeks of sticking new vegetables in, taking them out, mixing it around, it just magically starts to develop a flavor, as it builds up. So anyway, Adam James was a little bit obsessed with nuka pickling, but he was also obsessed with local food and sort of supporting local producers. And in Tasmania, there's not a lot of rice production, and there's not a lot of fresh rice bran around. So he was just experimenting with different alternatives. And then a farmer friend of his just had this big crop of turmeric and just couldn't sell it. And his friend was like, "Do you want 100 pounds of turmeric?" And Adam was like, "Sure, I'll see what I can do with that." And then the guy also had garlic. So Adam made this paste at a rather large scale. I mean, when I was at his house, which was February 2020, I was in Tasmania when the pandemic started. But he had this 100-liter hot-belly clay vessel on the deck of his apartment in the capital city of Tasmania, and it was full of this bright orange paste, and it was a paste made of turmeric, garlic, and turnips, little hakurei turnips, and salt, and just enough water to grind it up into a smooth paste. And then, by the time I saw it, it was 2 years old. He had been burying vegetables in it for a week or so, taking them out. He was selling vegetables at the local farmer's market. So he was burying vegetables in, pulling them out, putting more vegetables in. Anytime you have a perpetual brine like that, every generation of vegetables that you put in are going to pull some salt out. So you have to keep tasting it and evaluating the flavor, and definitely adding more salt. Over time, you might want to add more garlic. You might want to add some fresh turmeric. You definitely get more juice because the salt is absorbing into the vegetables, and it's also pulling some water out of the vegetables, so it gets more watery over time. I just dip a ladle into the top, try to pull some liquid out. Use it in salad dressings, use it in sauces, in curries. It's just so rich with flavor. But it's just a beautiful pickling concept. And I mean, I made my first batch just over a year ago. And I've just been sticking vegetables in and pulling them out, and it's so delicious. And then, when Aaron and I were brainstorming about this event, I was like, well, if you have time to like sort of start something, maybe you could make a paste like that, and then we could sort of, you know, I bet you'll enjoy doing it, and then we could, you know, I mean, it's not that exciting to sort of like watch me operate a food processor and like, you know, grind it up. You know, when I do it, I don't peel it all. I'll look over each one, and if it, you know.
What? You didn't? You should have told me.
Did you peel them all?
Took me a couple hours. It's fine.
So I mean, what I do is I just look them over, because mostly I've done this with fresh turmeric. Like I learned a few years ago I can grow turmeric in my garden in Tennessee, and I'll bet there's people around here growing turmeric.
Yes.
You know, I just kind of, you know, I wash them well, and then I just like look over them, and if any portion of the skin looks especially like rough or scabby or something, you know, I mean, I'll trim little bits off, but mostly I'll just leave the skin on there. Peel the garlic, of course. The turnips I just leave intact. Same thing, if there's a particularly damaged part of the skin, I might remove that. And then just blend it up with, you know, I think I use around 4% salt and a little bit of water. I mean, it's just so simple. Now, Aaron has put Brussels sprouts in here, which look beautiful.
This is the second thing that's gone on that paste.
I mean, you know, my bias is for like vegetables that are white, that like show off the bright color of the turmeric, but all kinds of vegetables. I mean, celery's been a theme tonight. I mean, I've had such nice experiences just sticking whole stalks of celery in there, leaving them for a week, pulling them out, slicing them up. You know, any of these like sort of perpetual brines, and I have a couple of other perpetual brine ideas in this book. But you know, it's like the bigger the chunks of vegetables, the longer you'll want to leave them in there, because it'll take longer for the, you know, for the flavors and the microbes to sort of penetrate all the way into the vegetables. But also, the smaller the pieces, the harder it is to, you know, fish them all out. So you need to sort of find a balance. Like what I've mostly been doing is like, you know, sticking whole daikons in, and I'll leave them for a couple of weeks. But I don't take the like biggest, fattest daikons. You know, I take the, you know, sort of, you know, thinner, longer ones. But you know, there's, you know, once you understand the basic concepts of fermenting vegetables, which is really about protecting them from oxygen. You know, the practice of fermentation is all about manipulating environments, and what you're trying to do is create selective environments that encourage the growth of certain kinds of organisms while simultaneously discouraging the growth of other kinds of organisms. And so, you know, with any kind of fermentation, like that's the most critical thing to understand. Like if you're trying to make vinegar, then it needs access to oxygen, and you want to have a rather broad surface area relative to your volume, and you need it to get air circulation. On the other hand, if you're trying to make alcohol and have it not turn into vinegar right away, then you want to have a little airlock like this so that the carbon dioxide can get out without the oxygen that would feed the vinegar organisms getting in. With the fermentation of vegetables, you know, it's all about protecting the vegetables from oxygen. You know, not that oxygen in and of itself will hurt them. It's just that in an oxygen-rich environment, there's a higher chance of getting molds developing. And so lactic acid bacteria are always present on vegetables, and in fact on any plants growing out of soil on planet Earth. You have to say growing out of soil because hydroponic vegetables do not necessarily have lactic acid bacteria on them. And it doesn't mean you can't ferment hydroponic vegetables, but it just means you don't want to ferment them alone. You want to make sure there's, you know, some soil-based vegetable there in addition that will be a reliable source of lactic acid bacteria. But lactic acid bacteria are never the only thing on the vegetables. Like, you know, the biggest reality is that we live in a biodiverse world, and you know, everything we eat is host to a broad range of organisms. And so, you know, the million-dollar question in fermentation is which organisms are going to grow. And like, you know, if we just like took that kohlrabi or a head of cabbage and loosely shred it and leave it in a bowl for 2 weeks, it is not going to turn itself into sauerkraut, and it's fairly easy to predict what's going to happen. which is that molds are going to grow on all of those cut surfaces. And I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who ever, let's say you cut a cabbage in half and you used half of a cabbage in a meal that you were preparing, and you left the other half maybe on the kitchen counter, maybe in the crisper drawer of the refrigerator, and then, however many days later you went to look at it, and it grew like a little dark growth of a kind of hairy mold over the cut surfaces. Anyway, I see a lot of people nodding, so I'm probably not the only one who's had an experience like that. So, I mean, vegetables, everything any of us ever eat has spores of molds on them that can potentially develop. And, it grows on the cut surface first because that's where it can access the nutrients. I mean, it's right there on the leaves. It just can't access the nutrients and start growing until you cut it, and the carbohydrate-rich juices start leaking out of it. And so if you take a whole bowl of shredded vegetables and you leave it in your warm kitchen for 2 weeks, it's never going to turn itself into sauerkraut. And what it's going to turn into instead is like a bowl of mold. And this summer, I know you all had some notably hot weather, but in a very hot, humid environment, that bowl of shredded cabbage, the mold could literally reduce it to a puddle of slime that would bear no resemblance whatsoever to delicious, tangy, crunchy sauerkraut. So, the key to fermenting vegetables is to get them submerged, to protect them from the flow of oxygen.
So does that mean you wouldn't ever mix that?
No. You can totally mix it. No. And in fact, it's not a totally anaerobic environment. I mean, because water has dissolved oxygen in it. And we don't want it to be a totally anaerobic environment, in fact, because, guess what notorious food poisoning organism can thrive in a totally oxygen-free environment? Botulism, Clostridium botulinum, right? So, you don't need it to be absolutely anaerobic. You just don't want a steady flow of fresh air, because that's what will really enable molds to thrive. Aaron was just showing me the room in the back where, they have one little room where they grow koji, and another little room where they're growing tempeh, and both of those need a steady flow of oxygen. It would be the easiest way to make those fail would be to sort of do it in a space that didn't get enough flow of oxygen. So when you're intentionally trying to grow mold, you definitely need a lot of oxygen.
I feel like if I didn't tend to that and stir it every day, that there would be lots of yeast and mold and things growing on top, probably were dried out.
Yeah, you could potentially get that. Although I have it in I have it in a little crock that has a lid that covers pretty much the entire surface, and so I just get a little funk around the very edge of that lid. But no, I totally, by mixing it frequently, you don't have to worry about mixing oxygen in and making it grow like that. The surface is where, how many of you have ever had a little funky surface growth on your ferments? Probably almost as many of you who have fermented at home. It's just, it's more or less inevitable, and, certainly nothing to freak out about. One of the most interesting experiences I had in my travels was in China. And this is actually documented. I made a series of videos in China with, I was traveling with a Chinese American friend, Mara Jane King, who's actually working on a book about Chinese fermentation. We visited this town in Sichuan province called Pijiang, where they make this amazing fermented condiment of fava beans and chili peppers called doubanjiang. And Liz Crane makes doubanjiang at home, which is wonderful. This guy who was the chief chef of this huge restaurant with 500 seats that showcases the doubanjiang in different dishes, when he heard we were interested in pickles, he took off his chef jacket and said, "Come with me." And we went for a walk several blocks away, and he had this pickle shack and it was like an open air roof structure with maybe like 40 big ceramic vessels. None of them were marked. He wanted to show us the fermenting long beans. And he kept opening up vessels and pulling out whole heads of bok choy and, pulling out chili peppers. And finally he found the long beans. But in every single vessel that he opened up, there was this like matrix on the surface. What I would call calm yeast. Although, from calm yeast to hairy white mold is sort of a continuum. But we're there taking pictures, videotaping. He's completely unself-conscious about it, mixing it back in. And my general observation is that the more like intimate people are with these processes, the more they've been around these processes their whole lives, the less they even like notice or think about it. It's just like, it's so inevitable that these kinds of funky surface growths develop. I don't mix it in myself. I like to skim it off as best I can.
But delicious, right?
But I do hear from people all the time who threw away their fermentation project because they got a little funky growth on it. If you're really put off by it, there's a lot of systems like this that can, that can discourage it by protecting the surface from oxygen. I mean, personally, I don't actually do any of them because I'm compulsively interested in looking, smelling, tasting. And I like to look, smell, and taste frequently as they develop. And all of these clever systems designed to exclude oxygen are sort of predicated on the idea that you're not going to keep opening it up, looking, smelling, and so they work great if you can just be patient and like, okay, that's going to be ready in 3 weeks. But the more you open it, the more you kind of defeat the purpose of the clever engineering.
I just had a basic question because I'm coming into all this like really, really brand new with no fermentation personal experience. But I want to make sure I was understanding what you're talking about with the mixture that you were continuing to put vegetables in, the turmeric and garlic. When you put vegetables back in, is that to make the mixture keep doing its thing, or in order to flavor the vegetables, or both? Or?
All of the above. I mean, you're putting them in because you want to pickle the vegetables. You want to acidify the vegetables. You want to flavor the vegetables with the turmeric, garlic, salt.
That's the purpose of the containment.
Yeah. But it also builds up acidity over time, and so, it'll ferment things a little bit faster as time goes on.
Is there a limit to how long you can leave something like that going? You said he had it for years?
Yeah, he's had it for years. I mean, it takes monitoring because, as I mentioned earlier, salt migrates out with the vegetables. So, eventually the salt content will be almost nothing. So, and then it could start to be susceptible to more different kinds of organisms growing in it. So, you could potentially keep using it forever, but you need to keep on adding a little bit of salt over time, turmeric, garlic, and the substance of it will, every time you pull a vegetable out, even if you wipe most of it off, there's going to be a little bit of it. So over time you need to replenish it and put some, fresh turmeric or fresh garlic or fresh turnips in. So, I mean, it can't, if you're really using it, it won't last forever without a certain amount of replenishment. But you could, if you kept going, I mean, you could keep replenishing it and use it for a lifetime. I mean, certainly with Nuka in Japan, I certainly have met people and families who have, like, it's been passed through the generations, and, people have, like, the continuation of their great grandmother's Nuka pot. So yeah, I mean, a lot of these things can keep perpetuating for indefinite periods of time.
Do you just add salt by taste? Like, how do you know when you need to replenish the salt and how much?
Only by taste. I mean, so in my recipe, I give a rough recommendation of 4%, but let me just suggest that my recipes and anybody's recipes, take them with a grain of salt, as long as we're talking about salt. But this is not rocket science. It's not like if you end up with like 3% salt instead of 4% salt, it's gonna like ruin everything and make it like potentially like, kill your children. I mean, it's just like, I mean, the difference between 4% salt and 3% salt is really just a matter of taste. And of course, 4% salt in the, you know, a food that's 4% salt is extremely salty to most people. But that's just the medium. And then you're putting vegetables into it. So really your vegetables, maybe your first batch of vegetables might end up being higher than 2%. But, you know, in general, your vegetables are not going to be higher than 2%.
Do you want me to fish them up for you at all?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it would be great for us to just go ahead and pass them around.
Can I ask a question about so I made some bags of sauerkraut fries and
Can I ask you to just take your mask down and say, because I can't hear you.
when I made some sauerkraut, I've had some aromas that come out that are not particularly agreeable, and I'm trying to resolve that.
Well, okay, so cabbages have a lot of sulfur. Sulfur compounds a lot of people find to be stinky. I don't know what to tell you. It's just the nature of the vegetable.
I have a point there. I have been told that the cores of the cabbage are more sulfury. So if you're more diligent about putting out the cores, you could reduce that smell, but I can't speak to the rest of it.
I've met people who basically, because their spouse or someone they were living with was was really bothered, they set up something like this, except they had a tube, you know, that you can get in a hardware store, a flexible tube that they put out the window. You know, so they would just off gas it out the window rather than into the kitchen.
I was wondering if that had to do with the term of ferment, and whether that lessens over time, or if that's just, you got it.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, it's just like at different stages of the fermentation, you'll definitely get different byproducts. But when you're starting with a sulfurous vegetable, a lot of the byproducts will be sulfur compounds that, you know, smell like farts to people, or, you know, just smell like other things that they might, you know, find disagreeable. You can ferment any vegetables. You don't have to ferment. It's cruciferous vegetables, brassicas, that really have the highest sulfur content. So you can ferment, you know, carrots, and you can ferment celery and lots of other vegetables that don't have such a high sulfur content, and experiment with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, right behind you. Okay, there's person with the black mask, and then woman behind. Yes.
I was just curious, with a paste, fermenting with a paste like that, would there be any benefits to supplementing the salt with calcium chloride?
I don't know. I mean, I've never tried that. I mean, you mean in terms of crispiness of the vegetable?
Yeah.
I haven't tried it. I don't know. You know, the thing is, I've only tried the things I've tried. But I mean, I just love hearing people experiment with other things, but never. I mean, really, with this particular style, I've never had issues with with vegetables getting soft and mushy. I also haven't put cucumbers in there. You know, cucumbers, zucchini, the watery summer vegetables are always the most challenging vegetables to ferment because they have such a higher concentration of enzymes that break down pectins, which are what make vegetables crispy and crunchy. So that might be that might be a viable approach, but I haven't tried it.
Sandor. You have something else?
There's someone else who had a question. Yeah.
It's unrelated to this.
That's okay.
So I was listening to your Howell Books talk from Tuesday.
Yeah.
You were talking about fermenting the meat on the counter.
Yeah.
And can you talk about I have friends who will let any food sit out on the counter for 10 seconds, and you're fermenting meat on the counter.
Well, okay, so significant. So okay, I hope it's not offensive that if we talk about meat.
People eat meat in the world? Oh my god.
So you know, I wouldn't just leave pork ribs or meat on the counter for days if it wasn't in something protective, and that rice, garlic, salt paste is very protective because the rice is carbohydrates. The garlic is lactic acid starter, lactic acid bacteria starter. The salt helps slow down putrefying bacteria. And so, you know, basically you get all this lactic acid production quickly from the paste that's around them, and then that acidity protects the meat. And so, throughout Asia, I've encountered like different traditions of fermenting meat or fish in rice. And so like what's missing from meat and fish in terms of preserving it through fermentation is carbohydrates, because the macronutrients that bacteria will convert into lactic acid or acetic acid or even alcohol, which are the three byproducts of fermentation that I would describe as biopreservatives. Like, they need carbohydrates. So the rice provides the carbohydrates that enable the acids to be produced quickly that will protect the meat.
I think that's fine.
Do you think you could ferment mushrooms in that, like, turmeric paste?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can just lacto ferment mushrooms alone. Like, yellow mushrooms are not plants. They too are host to lactic acid bacteria, and especially in Slavic cuisines, they do a lot of mushroom fermentation, and usually it's just mushrooms, salt, weight. And so the weight helps force the juice out of the mushrooms so that they can get submerged, just like any of these other things we're talking about. But yeah, you could, I always advise people do experimental small batches, don't experiment with 100 pounds of mushrooms. See how it goes with a small batch of mushrooms. And shiitakes would work so well. If there are more mushrooms you forage, some would probably work really well and some not as well. So I would just experiment with different kinds of mushrooms.
And that yam, is that how you pronounce it? You had last night at Marche in Eugene, they made that.
Yeah. So the other night, I did dinner something like I have no idea what we're going to be eating tonight, but a restaurant in Eugene called Marche did a fermentation themed dinner, and they made yam for 40 people, and it was delicious. I mean, people seemed like they were really excited about it. And it really had the same characteristic flavor that I get when I make it. Did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say, I got you that there if you want to try it.
Yeah.
And I got really excited when you asked me to do the turmeric paste. It turned out good, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I got the Brussels for it is because we had some broccoli stems left over, so I trimmed them and peeled them, and that's gonna be on your plates, whoever's having the dinner. And then we have another kind of similar concept of fermentation going on. We have misozuke also on the menu over there tonight too. I got the little kohlrabi misozuke, and then the only other one that I really thought was kind of similar but different is right here is I have the kasuzuke.
Okay. And kasuzuke, kasu is the byproduct of making sake. So it's basically decomposed rice along with the yeast and lactic acid bacteria that fermented the sake, and it has a million uses. I actually have a big section in my new book about different ways you can use kasu. But one really great way is making pickles.
Yeah.
And actually, these people that we both know, the Cultured Pickle Shop in Berkeley, they wrote down their kasuzuke method.
It's worth going down to Berkeley to get the kasumirin. It's insane. And I had a bottle and I had this much left, and then one of my employees knocked it off the shelf and broke it, and I cried. That's why I did it with a spigot, so I can capture all that mirin.
How long were the Brussels sprouts in there?
4 days.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that what? I was curious how you would actually harvest the vegetables out of there. You take them out with your hands and then just wipe
dump
off?
it into a tray and then pull it out so I don't stick my whole arm in there.
And I would say usually I've done larger pieces than that. So I'll just wash my hands. I'm not trying to run a commercial business. I just wash my hands really well and just reach in there and pull out the vegetables. And I try to have one generation at a time of vegetables in there. Like I try to use up all of first generation of vegetables, and then I'll bury some more vegetables. I certainly have left it for periods of time without any vegetables in it, and it seems to do fine in a resting stage. But it does get more watery over time, so I found it really important to remove some water. And generally I've been able to do that with a ladle, just sticking a ladle in, making a little well in it, and then water will seep into it, or it's not water, it's like flavorful liquid.
And then when you pull the vegetables out, you just kind of wipe the paste off with your fingers.
Yeah, and then usually, like let's say I have a big daikon radish or a stalk of celery, then I'll slice it into pieces. I think by cutting these in half, he's gotten all the flavors to penetrate deeply quickly, but it's also a little bit more work to like fish them all out and more surfaces to just sort of wipe the excess off of. Trade-offs. There's always trade-offs. Yeah, so there's just like a million ways. Like I have another recipe in here that's a completely different kind of perpetual brine. That's pao tsai. That's Chinese style, and basically you mix up a brine with salt and usually some sugar. You don't have to use sugar. In China, they use a very specific kind of sugar. They call it ding ding tang. And it's basically like Turkish taffy. It's a malt sugar that has the form of like Turkish taffy. But in Asian groceries here, you could buy a little jar of maltose, or honestly, you could just use cane sugar that's in your kitchen. It's not like you have to find exactly the same kind of sugar that they're using in China for the same effect. And it doesn't make the pickles sweet. It makes them get more acidic faster because you're using a more concentrated carbohydrate. It's almost impossible to ferment sweet pickles because whatever sugar you add at the beginning of the process is just going to accelerate the acidification and make for more dramatic, faster acidification. Sweet pickles are really purely a phenomenon of like a hot-packed vinegar pickle that's not going to have any, specific biological activity going on. Someone, yeah.
Okay, so invariably you lose some of the paste when you extract the vegetables from it, and then do you periodically reseed it with additional paste?
Sure. So right, as you notice that there's less paste because a little bit has migrated out, then like I actually just did that maybe 2 months ago. I noticed mine was going way down. I was harvesting my turmeric, and so I just like made a fresh quart. I have it in like a gallon-sized vessel, and I just made like an additional quart of paste just to like, beef it up. So the pao tsai. So you start with salt and sugar, and then spices. And the way I've been doing it is with this spice that I was introduced to in China, that's known in English as black cardamom, that has a really like just beautiful pungent flavor, and garlic, chilies, Sichuan peppercorns, and then I also put a little bit of licorice in it, like just like dried licorice that you'd make licorice tea out of. Sometimes I've used star anise. It's not a unified practice. Like, I first learned from this woman, Mrs. Ding, who I have pictures of, and I write about a little bit in my book. But then in other homes that we visited or restaurants, they also had pao tsai, but with different seasonings. It's not a unified thing. The pickles I grew up with are with garlic and dill. I was teaching in Poland one year, and a group of my students got into a kind of heated argument about the proper seasoning for pickles. And some of the students were horrified at the idea of garlic and dill. And they were like, you need allspice in a pickle. And you know, it's like people have, you know, you can flavor it however you like. Like there's no, you know, there's no wrong way to season a pickle. So anyway, you make your palate-side brine with whatever kinds of seasonings you like, and then like the first batch of vegetables will probably take about 2 weeks. But then it's like the brine is more acidic, the brine is more biologically active, and then the next batch of vegetables that you put in will ferment much more quickly. And so now I actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was doing some events in New York, and I did one event. We ate up all the vegetables, but it was at a farmer's market, and I just chopped up a daikon, but into fairly small pieces, and I put it in, and then I served it at the event the next day, and they were like beautiful and well pickled. But again, it's this issue of like, how big is it? What's the distance to the center of the pieces? So if I had more time, you know, I would probably do, you know, fewer bigger pieces left to my own devices, but because like I had more people I had to like have samples for tomorrow, I just decided like, okay, I'm going to slice it thinly so there's less depth to penetrate. And then same thing, like over time you need to add a little bit more sugar. You know, I added more Sichuan peppercorns. You know, whatever season. You know, you always, in the end, you have to rely on your taste, and you're evaluating it. You're the one who's going to eat it, and you know, you have to decide. You know, when is it ready? Like that's the $1 million question. You know, how long to ferment things, and you know, there's no objective answer to that. Like, you know, okay, maybe a traditional context, like maybe if you're from a Russian family and you grew up eating sauerkraut and your, you know, grandparents learned from their grandparents, well, you know, probably you're eating a really salty kraut that ferments for a long time because like that's the historical context. This is like survival through a long, harsh winter. But, you know, here you are in 2021 in Portland, Oregon, and, you know, chances are the ferments in your kitchen have less to do with survival through a long, harsh winter and, you know, more to do with, like, you know, you enjoy doing it yourself, you're looking for probiotics, you love the flavor of kraut and pickles, and, you know, you're making it for a different set of reasons. And so, you know, if the people making it for survival through a long, harsh winter, like, had the idea, like, we need a lot of salt because we need to be able to eat this over the course of, you know, 6 or 8 months, well, your context is different, and you don't need to preserve it for 6 or 8 months, and, you know, you don't need it to be high salt, and, you know, probably you're a little bit more influenced by some of our understanding now about some of the dangers of eating too much salt, and you might want to keep it more modestly salty. And like I said earlier, like, this is not rocket science. It never requires like some precise amount of salt. Now, the more you're working with high protein substrates, let's say you're making miso out of beans, let's say you're doing something with meat or with fish, then you kind of need more salt because, you know, salt, there's putrefaction. It's a sort of set of bacteria that you know, create specific acids that we would think of as putrid, and they're not necessarily toxic. I mean, it's more that they remind us of decomposition, and we feel a little scared of them. But, you know, I mean, a lot of cheeses that people love to eat, there's putrefaction going on in there. And, you know, putrefaction is not always a terrible thing. But anyway, with the fermentation of vegetables, you can be pretty flexible about the salt. In fact, you don't absolutely need salt at all. I mean, I write here about this this town in Japan that I visited called Kiso, which is like in a mountain valley that historically had little access to salt. And their tradition of fermenting vegetables is without any salt, and they maintain this tradition. What they do is a very short ambient temperature fermentation, and then they refrigerate it. But what they ferment it in is they backslop. Backslopping, which Aaron mentioned earlier, backslopping is when you take a little bit of a previous batch and use that as the starter for your new batch. So they just save all of the excess juice from these turnip green pickles that they make. And they just put this year's vegetables in last year's leftover juice and leave it for 24, 48 hours, and then they refrigerate it. And then as they package up the pickles, they save the juice for next year. These women, were all like in their 60s and 70s who were doing it. They said that that like the people they had taken over from doing it, they could trace the backslopping 200 years back. Like they, in that operation, they'd been backslopping for that long. The other tradition I know of fermenting vegetables without any salt is in Nepal, and they're fermenting them for longer periods of time, but then they dry them. So for first they like dehydrate the vegetables in the sun a little bit, like get them to wilt. Then, either pounding, or when I've done it, I've used a rolling pin, just kind of beat up the vegetables a little bit. Bruising the vegetables helps get the juice out. Then like pack it into a jar, just force it in, use some blunt tool. Pack it in tightly enough that you get juice, like up on the top. Leave the vegetables for several weeks or up to a month. Then you take them out and put them on a clothesline, or put them on pieces of cardboard in the sun. But then you dehydrate them. And then you can store them all winter dehydrated, and then they use them as an ingredient in soups and such. So there's different approaches. There actually, until a couple of years ago, there was a business in Santa Cruz, California called Rejuvenative Foods that was just selling salt-free sauerkraut. There's a couple of nutrition gurus who have been advising people that it's better to eat sauerkraut. You get more diverse probiotics if you eat sauerkraut without salt than with salt. I don't believe that. And actually, I met one of these diet gurus, Donna Gates, who writes the Body Ecology Diet. And I just assumed it was based on something. And I was like, hey, could you please send me the articles that say that you get more diverse probiotics if you don't use salt? And then she's like, oh no, that was just an idea that I had, and I decided I'd tell people that. So. I don't buy into it. Because lactic acid bacteria are very salt tolerant. And, the thing is, there's good reasons to use salt. Like all the places where they don't use salt, it's because they don't have easy access to salt. And salt is not absolutely necessary, but, salt, helps maintain a good texture, because what makes vegetables crispy and crunchy are pectins, and salt hardens pectins. And then in the long run, there are these enzymes called pectinase enzymes that break down the pectins, and that's why your pickles sometimes get soft and mushy, is because you probably did them in hot weather when the pectinase enzymes are especially active. So salt is especially critical for maintaining a pleasing texture. But just because traditionally some people might have used a lot of salt does not bind you to having to use a lot of salt, and you can really derive most of the advantages of using salt with relatively small portions of salt. And so, when people are, tell me oh, my doctor told me I need to moderate salt intake, can I make sauerkraut without any salt? Well, yes, you can, but you're probably not going to like it that much. So, it's you can use exceedingly small amounts of salt. I'll sometimes make sauerkraut with 0.5% of salt, which is a lot less than 2% salt, and even less than 4% salt. So, the beauty of doing this yourself is you can make it the way you like it. You can use less salt if you prefer foods with less salt. What I love about fermenting vegetables with less salt is I can just eat a mountain of them. If something is 2 or 3% salt, I love the way it tastes, but I'll just eat a small amount of it, because I just don't like to eat that much of things that are that salty. But a low salt sauerkraut, I love to drink a 16-ounce glass of, sauerkraut juice or pickle brine. But I can only do that if it's fairly low salt. Anyway, I've been rambling. Does anyone have any?
It's the hair effect.
I feel like you talked about your timeline for the paste often, but what about the vinegar, the kraut? What's the timeline for those? Yeah.
It's been different for all of them. I mean, like and I think that the biggest takeaway I got when I started reading your books is that there's no clear answer for a lot of things, and like, a texture that you might like or whatever might just be based off like where you were born or whatever, right? So when it comes to like the vinegars, the pear vinegar that I made, it came off the tree already boozy. So then it became vinegar, I think literally within a couple of weeks. It was like the fastest I've ever made a vinegar. And then these ones they're boozy now, and I'm about to take the tops off of these. I only put the tops on because I didn't want to tend them as hard, But I would say like, and then whenever I make a vinegar out of wine, like a prepared wine, like Antica Terra locally, they gave me a big barrel of wine, and I made vinegar. That took forever for red wine vinegar, but I found the fruit vinegars that I make go really much faster.
Yeah, and like, temperature will just always make it, different. I mean, so the metabolism of all these organisms goes faster when it's hot, slower when it's cool. So like, just like, if Aaron were to say like, oh, okay, this is like a 4-week process or something, that would just be completely based on what the temperatures happen to be in those 4 weeks, and you couldn't generalize about that. So sure, I mean, with different kinds of processes, you can have a general idea of how long you think it will take, but it will, the temperature will have a huge bearing on it, the salt proportion will have bearing on it, or the sugar proportion.
Yeah, the fruit's different, right? Like this fruit was riper than this fruit, so that's going to be a big difference. But I think that like when you're in food manufacturing, like we're like a very, 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 very tiny micro manufacturer, and I think that you guys would know this too, right? You can like you can control a bunch of it if you have a lot of tools. Like you're like, I can measure protein, and then I can like whatever, but it's not practical for a person to do, and it's also not fun, right? It takes, like, we have all these fucking clipboards up back there, and we have to like measure temperatures of the room and all that kind of shit, and it's just like not fun anymore. So I think it's more of this is craft and artistry. Yeah.
But I mean, you can have a general idea, like those. Vinegars will usually take like a bunch of weeks or a couple of months. Kraut, it'll usually, sort of get below 4.6 in less than a week, but, you might like it just, just barely at that, or you might want to let it get more and more acidic, and you might like it better after 6 weeks than after a week.
Would you say volume also changes that? Like with kombucha for sure. Like when I'm making 40 gallons of kombucha, it's slower than if I make a gallon of kombucha. Vinegar, I feel like the same. It's a little slower, but I don't know if kraut. I don't know if it's.
I haven't ever noticed that with kraut. I think with vinegars, it would have to do with the ratio of surface to volume.
Yeah.
And so if you did 40 gallons and you had such a big vessel that it could, just be a foot high and be a really broad area, it wouldn't be any slower, right?
Yeah, like they would do, like one thing I tried one time was to do a rolling generator. So like a big barrel, put reeds in it, and then put the alcohol, and then you would just roll it every day. And I'm gonna get another one to try that, so that it puts the wine onto all the reeds that are up in the air, and so then it like creates biofilms and stuff, and then they get put back in. And it's like an old method that was developed in like the 20s or something. Yeah.
But, and then there's all these like esoteric things that, other factors. I mean, people have been studying like how, the same, let's say, batch of beer does listening to different music. There's just like, and there's a lot of traditions where part of the, ceremonial context is like singing to the ferment. And so, I don't know, like I visited this sake brewery in Japan, Terada where, the master brewer, while he was making his starter for the sake, part of his ritual was like singing to it every day.
That's so awesome.
So, and I don't know, like there's so many factors.
So what if someone in this room wants to try Pesout tomorrow in Portland?
Okay.
Where would they do that? How could they do that?
Okay, so tomorrow at the PSU Farmers Market, we'll be demonstrating Pesout. which is this sort of Chinese perpetual brine that I just have been talking about. Or if you pick up a copy of my book, you don't need to go to anybody.
Oh, I have some here.
It's going to be raining tomorrow.
And you can, what's that?
It's going to be raining tomorrow.
Is it going to be raining
There's
tomorrow?
a big
Yes.
Do you have a pickle shack?
Do I have a pickle shack? No, I don't have a pickle shack. I mean, I have a, I have a kitchen that's like probably bigger than this room. I have a huge kitchen and I have a cellar. So I mean, my whole life is a pickle shack. You should see me. I'm like, I get off the airplane and I have one of these like gallon-size plastic pickle barrel. Not pickle barrels. What do you call them? Olive barrels. If you've ever seen it like in a store that sells olives, you can get these gallon-sized plastic barrels. So I came with that filled with Pesout. And then I put it in one of those like dry bags, like when you go kayaking, you can like keep your valuables dry. But instead, I'm using it to keep the any liquid that comes out of the barrel inside the bag, so it doesn't get all over my luggage. So I'm opening up my luggage to make sure they didn't confiscate my pickles. And yeah.
With all the travel and everything, how do you manage all your ferments?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me say that, like, until, a month and a half ago, I really hadn't done any traveling, since I got back from Australia in March of 2020. But, I mean, that's part of my routine of getting ready to travel, is that, certain kinds of things, I just wrap them up. I like do them when I have a long horizon of time at home, and then I just wrap them up before I go. And then certain kinds of things can just stay, like like my crock full of turmeric paste, and it's a kind of a crock that has a little drop lid that rests on the surface of it, and that does a really good job of protecting the surface. And then I just have a cloth over that. And I'm sure when I go home after 2.5 weeks away, there'll be a little bit of funk around the edge of that, and I'll just wipe it away, but it'll be fine. I mean, I certainly have lots of kraut and kimchi going, and it's fine for a couple of weeks without being checked on all the time. I have some alcohol ferments going. I have some miso in the cellar going. My sourdough starters I put in the fridge and just rest them in the fridge. I've abandoned them for up to 6 months in the fridge, and then I have a little process of getting it going again. I pour off the liquid that accumulates on the top. I get rid of the top layer that's a little bit discolored. I'll take like half of a teaspoon from the center, put it in a fresh jar, put fresh water and fresh flour on that, and the next day it's beautiful and vigorous and just back to active. But I would say I sort of divide the ferments between things that are very short term, like I make idli. I soak my rice and lentils one day. The next day I blend it into a paste, and then the next day or maybe 2 days later, I'll make my dosas or my idlis. So that's not like a long-term project. And by the way, you can store that batter in the refrigerator for at least a week, and so you can just make batter and then enjoy dosas for a week or longer. And so there's the things that are short-term things that I'm going to eat right away, like the nem. I would never make the nem and then go away for 3 weeks and just leave it on my counter. That's 3 to 5 days, and then once the ribs are acidified, they'll last in the fridge longer than just fresh meat would last. So maybe I would give it up to 2 more weeks in the fridge, but I make that and then I eat it. I'm not letting that sit around. But certain things, a lot of these are stable, and I might leave them for 2.5 weeks, but I wouldn't necessarily leave them if I was going away for 3 months. But I haven't done that in years, so I try not to go away for that long.
I think that where I was saying that we tend it every day, part of that kind of comes into the fact that we do sort of express affection to them. You know what I mean? So they are something that's joyful. So we do like to come in and check it out every day. I was like, I'm gonna take tomorrow off, but I'm definitely gonna come in and like look at everything, you know. But yeah, it's super.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, I mean, I think that that's very, you know, I mean, it's, I mean, people wanna tend to their creations, and it's good to hear about them, but also like they're fine for a day, just like your children once they're a certain age, like they're fine for a day. You know, your ferments are fine for a day.
I'll take 2 or 3 weeks off at a time. I have one of my employees come in and fill water in the wells, and I'm like, "Cool, see you in half a month."
Oh, that's a really good point, because water evaporates, especially in a heated space or in a dry climate. Water evaporates. So any of these like airlock systems, they're not gonna stay there forever. Like you need to periodically check the water levels and top them off if you're using them.
With like the vegetable fermenting at first, when you're making that first mixture, and you're just like doing this for the first time, what are some of the most common like mistakes and just wrong things to never do, or things you didn't know at first that you are just...
I mean, the thing is, for me, they've been so effortless that I just have never seen any problems. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I would say, okay, so you're talking about this paste.
Something like that.
So I would say the biggest thing is like you want to let it sit for up to a month before you start putting vegetables in it, or at least that's the way I learned how to do it, and that's the way I've done it. So you want to protect the surface a little bit. So I'm using a style of vessel that has a drop top, which means a lid that fits inside. It's a cylindrical vessel, and it has a lid that fits inside. Sometimes people call that a follower. That rests on the surface of the vegetables. If you didn't have that, you know, I might do like, you know, this style here and just use you know, a plastic bag to cover the surface. You know, you don't even have to have water in it. You could just put a layer of plastic on it, a plate that fit inside your vessel that could sit on it. You know, the Noma book, which I know I saw a copy in here somewhere, but the Noma book of fermentation, you know, Noma's this like, you know, very renowned and high-end restaurant in Copenhagen, but, you know, they use vacuum sealers. Like whatever it is they're fermenting, they'll just like vacuum seal it in a bag and leave it, and then it blows up like a pillow. Their fermentation room just is like shelves of pillows, and they're all like inflated from the carbon dioxide that forms, but there's no oxygen in there, so they're not dealing with any funky surface growth. And I mean, I don't have a vacuum sealer. I'm just not interested in, you know, doing that much use of single-use plastics, but it's a very effective method. So I would say that the biggest thing would be like just protecting the surface from the flow of oxygen while it's developing.
Are there any guidelines, like what type of foods can like make a good medium for fermentation?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I guess my notions of this have really been expanding over time. Because, you know, for the first like many years that I did this, you know, the only medium that I knew of was salty water. Then I learned about nuka pickles and kasu pickles, and, you know, some of the, you know, different Japanese styles, misozuke. So, you know, that sort of gave me the idea that you could use lots of different mediums, but, you know, they all have to be things that will acidify. Like acidity is what defines a pickle. A pickle is anything preserved in an acidic medium. And so it has to be something that will acidify over time. But, you know, that could be any carbohydrate-rich substance, really. So, I mean, other than that, I don't know. I mean, I would just say if you're experimenting with different kinds of, you know, pickling media, I would just say, like with any kind of experimentation, I would encourage you to experiment in small batches, because the one thing about experimenting is you have to expect that you'll sometimes have failures. So like I actually have a paste at home that I just tried on a whim that's like this, except I used beets and onions. And it's just sitting there right now. I mean, I have vegetables in it. It smells good, or it smelled good as of a week and a half ago when I left home. You know, hopefully when I go home now, they'll be good. Did you follow?
No, I think fingers crossed it's good.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we used to do like for our old restaurant Farm Spirit, we used to do fermented hack rye terms that we'd make purees out of to mount on top of sauces to try to give it like a piquancy, and then there's like this really great savoriness from like a hack rye turnip puree just straight up. And we definitely had it like made a puree, had it in the fridge, and then like somehow something dropped and fell into it, and stayed in there for a while, and it definitely pickled inside of there. But I think that like you're saying, like you just try to create conditions, right?
Yeah.
To allow something to happen. So if it's anaerobic, basically there's a little bit of dissolved oxygen, but it's basically anaerobic.
Yeah.
There's salt to inhibit pathogenic bacteria. Then you can probably be able to, and everything is successful. It just might not be the success that you want, but it doesn't stay.
That's actually something I was thinking, is that when you're starting this practice, how often do you ever like scrap what you made because it's inedible?
A lot for me.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly I have thrown stuff away, but it hasn't been that much for me. I mean, like occasional batches. I mean, honestly, the main reason why I have discarded vegetables that were fermenting is that I failed to adequately protect them from flies. And then if flies land on the surface of your fermenting vegetables, they'll lay eggs. And then not too many days later, you'll find like, little white worms crawling out of them, maggots. And, while that might be a viable strategy for increasing the protein content of your sauerkraut, I would assume that most people would prefer not to have maggots crawling out of their sauerkraut. So, but actually, I have sometimes like had a whole big crock that had maggots crawling out of the top, and I dumped it in the compost, and then I saw how beautiful the bottom was. And one thing I've learned about maggot behavior is they never migrate down. They're just migrating from where they were, where they were hatched on the surface. And if you leave them for a long time, then the byproducts that accumulate from them will make the whole thing foul, and you'll want to throw away the whole thing. But if you catch it early and you take off the top several inches, I have certainly eaten below that. I want to talk about one other ferment, which is natto. So natto is this, wonderful Japanese fermentation of whole soybeans. Usually, it's these special little soybeans that have more surface area than the bigger soybeans that are widely available. There's actually a commercial producer here in Portland making it, but it's also really easy to make yourself. And I have info about making miso, making natto. But natto is often a little bit controversial or challenging for people who have not grown up around natto. And I did not love natto the first time I tried it, but I have come to enthusiastically love natto. And the thing that got me to try natto again was there's this character named Bill Shirtliff, and he wrote these books in the 70s and 80s, the book of tofu, the book of tempeh, the book of miso. Like these, he and his wife wrote these incredible how-to books that have, really are classics in the English language fermentation literature. And when Bill Shirtliff read Wild Fermentation, he sent me this very nice email, like I saw your book, there are so many things I loved about it, here are some things I loved about it, these are some things I'm critical of about it. And he was like, you just left out natto. I left out natto because I had once tasted natto and it just didn't appeal to me at all. but he was like, it's a flavor just like camembert cheese. And it's a whole food ferment, and it only takes about 24 hours, and it's very straightforward. And so I was like, okay, well, I know I love camembert cheese. I just wasn't thinking about that when I tried natto. And I really admired this man and the work that he's done, so I'm going to try natto again. And I've just come to adore natto. But what I've learned in my travels is that, outside of Japan, in China, in Burma, in Nagaland, which is in the very eastern part of India, as well as across West Africa, people eat foods just like natto, except that instead of eating them wet and a little bit, mucilaginous, sticky, stringy, they eat it dry. And they use it as a seasoning. So instead of just eating the whole fermented beans in their wet form, they mix it in with other flavors. And I've been making these seasonings that I call it special sauce. Actually, my friend Mara Jane King is who first dubbed it special sauce, but the name is stuck. And so we dehydrate natto, and then we grind it up almost like gomasio with sesame seeds and salt. And then sometimes we add other seasonings, like I love to do it with caraway seeds, or with chili pepper and Sichuan peppercorns. But I make different flavored seasonings with it, and just sprinkle it on food. And I have yet to share it with anybody who didn't like it. Including people who are very squeamish about food, and I think people who would never for a minute, just pick up whole natto beans and enjoy eating them. And so that's my plug to give natto another chance, and maybe try it in one of these dried forms that you might find it more acceptable. And a lot of fermented foods are acquired tastes. I hear all the time from people who assume that their children aren't going to like sauerkraut. And I mean, sure, if you wait until a kid is 9 and then you put sauerkraut on their plate, they might say, ooh, what is that? But, if you're giving it to them when they're teething, in my family, pickles were the teething food. So you just let the teething infant gnaw and suck on pickles, and they will love it for the rest of their lives. There's nothing intrinsic to pickles or sauerkraut that kids don't like. Kids actually love sour flavors, or many kids, most kids. But all of these things, as a kid, I didn't love blue cheese. I liked American cheese and cheddar cheese and all the other cheeses that were a little bit scary to me as a child, and now they're the ones that I get excited about. And I don't know anyone who liked coffee the first time they tasted it, or beer, or lots of other fermented things. So, the flavors of fermentation can be strong, and sometimes, it takes a few tries to, key into what people find so delicious to them. And the thing is, if you have no cultural context for a food, if you've never seen someone loving it, with cheeses, I watched my parents enjoying these cheeses that I was squeamish about. But, because I saw them taking pleasure in it, that gave me a reason to try it again. And I think that, for a lot of Westerners who just try natto once on a whim, they don't have any, role models that they're seeing, taking great pleasure in it. And that's one of the things that I think has made it harder for people to find that acceptable. But I'll be your role model. Okay, any final questions? Well, I thank you all for your interest, and thank you, Aaron, for organizing this and making this happen. And for those of you who are going home, thank you. I'll sit here for a little while and sign books, and for those of you who are going to be in the meal, I'll see you there.
Thank you, Sandor. If you'd like to buy a copy, we have some books here we bought from Chelsea Green, the publisher. And I got this pen here if you want one.
Okay, great. You know, I've got my pocket.
You got your special pen?
I've got my Sharpies that match the
And here's a saddle if you want.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are we still on Instagram Live?
Yeah, should I?
Yeah, you can give it to me. You just hit it turn off.
Okay, so I'm gonna stay right here, and if anyone wants a book and scribe or anything, come on down. Turmeric color. So this is for
Yeah.
Would be very good.
Good evening.
That's the long way from